Hello, anatomy students. We're going to finish up our notes today, and then instead of our typical discussion board, I have a urinary system case study for you. That will be the assignment that I grade as far as your attendance goes today, and then we'll talk about some other assignments that you could work on today if you have some extra time. So last time we were together, we talked a little bit about how water is distributed throughout the body. We call these different areas that hold water compartments. And the main compartments are inside of the cell. We call that intracellular fluid or cytosol. But it's the extracellular fluid that really is available for moderation and for the movement inside and outside of the renal tubule. So this is the water found in the interstitial fluid and, of course, the blood plasma that's constantly being monitored and being regulated so that the body has what it needs in order to do the biochemistry to keep you alive. So the two major fluid compartments, intra and extracellular fluid, and your intracellular fluid does contain a lot more water. But keep in mind that that water is kind of locked down and it's not really available for regulation. It's stuck inside of those cells. It has to pass through the plasma membrane and then all the way through the capillary walls in order to be regulated by most of the hormones that we talked about yesterday. So remember that your thirst center is located in your hypothalamus. It is part of your brainstem and really, really important in keeping you alive. Hopefully, whenever you're thirsty, you can find something to drink, and that will help your body gain water and keep you in homeostasis. If not, we also have some hormonal elements that will help your body to retain water or retain salt, which retains water, in order to keep your blood pressure high enough to provide oxygen and nutrients and waste disposal to all of your organs. That really is the primary goal. Angiotensin, aldosterone, and ADH all have the same effect, which is to make you create less urine, to retain water, and that urine will be very concentrated. The only one that will help you get rid of excess water is called atrial natriuretic peptide. They each have their own method of doing it, but basically we either directly move water, like we do with ADH, or we move salt in order to move water. So electrolytes are the other part of the equation here. Remember that electrolytes are just dietary salts that will turn into ions, and they are very useful for us because they're easy to pump back and forth. But when you are deficient in them, like if you've been sick, diarrhea, vomiting, had blood loss, or if you're just exercising a lot, sweating a lot, and not regaining those salts, you can have an electrolyte imbalance. So other people that are very susceptible to electrolyte imbalance are babies or the elderly, anybody who can't get their own food or drink, somebody else has to bring it to them. If you're undergoing treatment with intravenous medications, if you have drains or catheters, a catheter is a tube that's inserted in the urethra and it actually goes all the way up to the bladder. So it constantly drains that urine without actually having to visit the bathroom. So generally these are people that are bedbound or are under sedation, and so they can't, get up and go to the bathroom themselves. Drains could be like after a surgery, they will put those little drains under the skin in the interstitial space to drain any inflammation and excess fluid that might be in there. Generally, drains and catheters are going to be very short term, but if you have somebody who has to be on them or use them for long term, that can really throw off their water and electrolyte balance. If you're losing a large amount of fluids, we were talking about being sick. If you live somewhere hot, so we don't have that problem, right? Or if you've had trauma or chronic conditions, obviously if your kidneys don't work very well, you are very susceptible to electrolyte imbalance. So the best way to keep your kidneys working effectively is to drink water, to eat a healthy, balanced diet. Most people, you don't have to seek out electrolytes because if you eat any processed food, there's going to be plenty of salt already in it. But for those risk populations, like the very old, the very young, or any of those people we listed on the previous page, it is possible to drink too much water. We call this water intoxication. And no, it doesn't make you appear intoxicated, it doesn't affect your mental status, but what it can do is cause edema. It causes your cells to swell because your electrolyte levels are so dangerously low that it's not very effective to move water in and out of those three compartments that we talked about. So you and I are not susceptible to water intoxication. You'd probably have to drink 3 or 4 gallons of water in a day before that this would even become an issue. It just is not an issue because our kidneys hopefully work really well. Who it does affect is going to be infants under the age of 6 months. You should never ever feed water or juice or anything other than breast milk or formula to a baby under 6 months old, unless you're under the direct, if a doctor has told you to do that, that's different. But babies that are under 6 months old, their kidneys just don't work as well. And so they need to have breast milk or formula, which has exactly what they need to grow. It has the right amount of water versus proteins, fats, and electrolytes. The other people that might suffer from water intoxication are going to be people with kidney disease. So if you are not a baby and if you do not have kidney disease, there really is no possible way for you to drink too much water. But basically what's happening with water intoxication is that your cells can't regulate the movement of water. The opposite is much more likely to happen, where excessive blood loss, sweating, vomiting, or diarrhea, a lack of water, can cause your concentration in your interstitial fluid and plasma to get dangerously low in sodium. And that will decrease, again, it will kind of snowball through all those other those other fluid compartments, which eventually could lead to coma, convulsions, or possibly even death. Electrolytes also play an important role in regulating pH. So a quick refresher of pH, it stands for per hydrogen. So think of it as a fraction with 1 on the top and hydrogen on the bottom. So the lower the number, the more free hydrogen ions are found in that particular solution. So average body pH should be between 7.35 and 7.45, so just slightly basic, because 7 is neutral. But your body has many, many ways of making sure that we don't go above or below this. So we're talking, this is the pH of your blood, your interstitial fluid, and that intracellular fluid. There, of course, are certain parts of the body, like the stomach, where it's very, very basic, or very, very acidic rather, or parts of the small intestine where it's very, very basic. But for your body fluids, they should always be between 7.35 and 7.45. Also remember, this is logarithmic, so a rise of 1 unit of pH is actually 10 times more hydrogen ions. So it is a very, it's a very tiny window, a very tiny set point for your body to work well, but each unit is pretty substantial. So besides the breathing is one way that we can regulate pH. Your digestive system regulates pH, and your kidneys regulate pH by absorbing or secreting hydrogen ions. We also produce buffers. All of our body compartments or fluid compartments do have these combinations of acid and bases that are secreted all the time that will help minimize any changes to pH. So the most common one is carbonic acid and bicarbonate. That is found in the blood and will help to make sure, regardless of what your partial pressure of CO2 is, that your blood always stays within that range, because it's life or death type of regulation. If those buffers and your urinary system are not working well, then your respiratory system will kick into gear and do what's called respiratory compensation. So it's compensation because it's kind of picking up the slack. It's making up for your kidneys not doing what they need to do. So in respiratory compensation, you're going to be breathing either faster or slower based on what is needed. If you are, if your pH has dropped, so your pH is too acidic because your kidneys are failing to excrete hydrogen ions, then you're going to kick into, so it's going to increase your breathing rate. So your respiratory system is going to compensate because your digestive system is causing you to be in acidosis. Okay, so some of this stuff is a little tricky, so copy it down, maybe rewind me and watch it again. If your pH is too low, that's why it's acidosis, and it's because of your metabolism. Your respiratory system will cause you to breathe more of that CO2 out, and that will bring your pH back up to normal. The opposite is also true. If your blood pH is too high, meaning it's alkaline or basic, usually this is because you vomited out the contents of your stomach, including that hydrochloric acid, or you're taking too many like Tums or something. Your breathing rate will actually slow, causing more CO2 to remain in your bloodstream, which will make your pH go down and back to normal. So all of this, of course, is regulated by negative feedback. All of these major organs, major blood vessels are going to have pH monitors in them. The last ditch effort to regulate your pH is going to be done by the kidneys. So we call this renal compensation. So if instead of your metabolism being the problem, your digestive and urinary systems, your breathing might be the problem. This is actually what's happening when you're doing a hard workout and you're breathing really heavily. When you breathe out too much CO2, you are setting yourself into respiratory alkalosis because that CO2 is equivalent to acid and you're breathing it out. So now you're basic. So hyperventilation will trigger the kidneys to reabsorb more H+. And normal bodies, healthy bodies can do that for a short time. If instead you are hypoventilating, you can't breathe out that CO2, the kidneys are going to come in and compensate by excreting that H+ for you. So this is one reason why people have to be on ventilators, not only to provide enough oxygen, but to get rid of that carbon dioxide and maintain your pH. So as a rule of thumb, your blood is acidic, you're in acidosis if it's below 7.35 pH. That can depress your central nervous system. And alkalosis, where it's higher than 7.35, actually excites the nervous system. So a lot of healthcare providers, whether they be ER, doctors, or paramedics, can notice if somebody is kind of really sleepy or if they're kind of agitated. It could be because of these changes. And of course, large pH changes will inevitably lead to death. So we want to avoid that at all possible. So water balance, as we mentioned before with the water intoxication stuff, is much more difficult to achieve in babies and in the elderly. So specifically talking about babies 0 to 12 months, it's because they have a lot more extracellular fluid. We talked about that intracellular fluid is kind of trapped in those cells and it's harder for it to move. It keeps it safer. Babies are squishy. They have a lot more of their water outside of their cells, and so it's more susceptible to environmental change. They also are growing really fast, so their metabolism is really high, but their kidneys don't work very well. They also breathe a little bit faster too, just because their respiratory and cardiovascular systems are a little bit different. So here's just showing, an adult male versus an adult female. You can see only about 50% of their body is water, but with an infant, it's almost 75% water, so it's very, very high. So we've already mentioned a couple of these in talking about water balance. Older adults have an impaired ability for all of these things, so water balance, electrolytes, and acid-base balance. So some common diseases, dehydration and hypernatremia, these go hand in hand because if we don't have as much water, we have a lot of sodium, which its symbol is Na. Hyponatremia is the opposite. We don't have enough sodium. Hypokalemia is not enough potassium. And edema is just a buildup of fluid in all of those body compartments, or specifically the cells. So one procedure that can leave, if kidneys have completely failed, the last-ditch effort to maintain homeostasis is called hemodialysis. This is when you're going to use a machine to do what your kidneys cannot. Generally, this will happen when you have severe kidney disease, stage 4, when your kidneys don't work at least 15% of what they should. So the average treatment of hemodialysis is 3 times a week for 3 hours. So it is a huge amount of time. It's not very pleasant, I would assume, because the blood has to come out of your arm, go in through this machine, and then go back in again. Hopefully it's temporary, but people who are not good fits for a kidney transplant may be stuck doing hemodialysis for the remainder of their life. So definitely something to consider. There's also a lot of allied health professions dealing with running those hemodialysis machines and providing people the care that they need. So today's assignment, a little different. We're going to do a case study instead. That's what I'm grading for today's attendance. And then other things you can work on, exercise 36, that's due Tuesday. The practice lab quiz, because the lab quiz, this is wrong, is actually Wednesday. And then our unit exam is on Friday. So preparing and studying for those, never too early. You guys have a very long weekend ahead. We will next be in class in person on Tuesday, the 11th. So I'll see you guys then. Please make sure you do some studying for that lab quiz.